Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer on building modern React user interfaces. Look, if you're a focused learner who is ready to finally master React, from its most fundamental building blocks all the way to writing perfectly clean, totally scalable code, you are in the exact right place. Today, we aren't just looking at how to build UIs. We're going to put on our inspector hats and figure out how to avoid those common, sneaky pitfalls that make codebases incredibly fragile as they grow. But before we even touch a single line of code, we got to ask the big question: why learn React? Out of all of the frameworks out there, why is mastering this specific JavaScript library widely considered one of the absolute most profitable decisions you can make in your development career right now? Okay, let's dive into this. Over $130,000. That is the high-end salary potential for developers who truly understand how to work with reactjs. It's basically the dominant force in modern web development today. And mastering it, well, it opens a whole lot of doors. So, here is our architect's blueprint for today's explainer. We're going to cover Welcome to Modern React, components, JSX and state, dynamic lists and keys, common React anti-patterns, and we'll wrap up with mastering clean React code. All right, let's jump straight into section 1. Welcome to Modern React. And really, the history and value of the library. Let's trace the story of how we actually got here. React was initially released and maintained by Facebook way back in May 2013. Fast forward a bit to 2021, and we saw this massive industry-wide shift away from those bulky legacy class components toward the streamlined functional components that absolutely dominate modern codebases today. By October 2024, the development community's focus really zeroed in on scaling applications properly and stamping out those nasty architectural anti-patterns. And looking ahead to 2026, modern React 19 is for sure the standard for building complex, highly interactive experiences, think advanced online shopping apps. It's a constantly evolving ecosystem, but the core principles, they remain incredibly powerful.
Moving right along to section 2, components, JSX, and state, the true building blocks. So I want you to think of React like a giant set of Legos. You aren't just writing one massive, monolithic web page, you're assembling a highly functional system out of distinct, reusable pieces. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is JSX, JavaScript in XML. It's this brilliant syntax extension that lets you write HTML-like templates right inside your JavaScript components. It beautifully renders dynamic strings, numbers, and arrays straight to the page. But if you try to render a raw JavaScript object, React will completely break and throw an error at you. No way around it. It's a remarkably powerful tool, as long as you play by its rules. Now let's completely demystify the somewhat invisible use-state process and see how React actually, well, reacts. Imagine a user clicks a button. Just a simple click. That single event triggers the use-state setter function. By setting a new state, React instantly re-renders that specific component. And boom, the UI updates immediately. The golden rule here is you never modify state directly yourself. You use the setter, and React handles all the heavy lifting behind the scenes to update exactly what the user sees. Okay, section 3, dynamic lists and keys, adding structure to our data. Look, real-world apps need dynamic data, right? When you're building something like a grocery shopping app, you're going to be iterating over data and rendering lists using the JavaScript .map function. But I really need to warn you about a critical trap here. A key is a unique attribute, like an item ID, that is absolutely non-negotiably required for each list item. Why? So React can specifically identify which items changed, which were added, or which were removed. If you omit these keys when you generate your mapped lists, you are going to massively confuse React when the component tries to re-render. Always provide a unique key.
Which brings us to a super important part of our explainer. Section 4, common React anti-patterns. Time to do a little interior inspection. I have to ask, are sneaky hidden pitfalls making your codebase fragile as your project grows? Well, let's find out. Here is the rule of 6. These are the 6 enemies of clean code as brilliantly identified by developer Jintao Q. Think of this as a structural inspection of our React house. First up, we've got props drilling, leading to tightly coupled components. Then we have in-component transformation causing totally bloated responsibilities, and complicated logic in views making your UI incredibly hard to reuse. Rounding out the bottom 3, a lack of tests making refactoring incredibly risky, duplicated code creating a massive maintenance burden, and finally, those massive, long God components that completely break the single responsibility principle.
Let's actually break a few of these down. And this brilliantly illustrates our first major pitfall, props drilling. Picture a clean state management setup where data flows exactly where it's needed. Super elegant, right? Now contrast that with a messy scenario where data is passed down through 5 unnecessary intermediate layers just to reach the one tiny component at the very bottom that actually cares about it. Every single intermediate component now has to handle props it doesn't even use. It creates a highly fragile system that is just an absolute nightmare to maintain or refactor. Next up is in-component data transformation. Honestly, just thinking about this one gives me a headache. Imagine fetching data, transforming things like formatting addresses, and rendering the UI all stuffed directly into a single component's useEffect hook. It's a mess. It completely muddles the responsibilities within your component. What you want is separation of concerns, extracting that fetching and transformation logic out entirely. It keeps the component incredibly easy to read, highly reusable, and most importantly, super easy to test. And that actually leads right into our next anti-pattern, complicated logic in views. Listen, components are meant to focus on presenting the UI. That's it. They are definitely not meant for implementing massive business rules. If you find yourself calculating dynamic discounts, estimated shipping costs, and complex taxes right inside your render function, you really need to step back. You want clean, reusable UI components where all that heavy, brain-busting logic is extracted out into separate service functions or custom hooks. I also have to vigorously warn you about the literal silent killers of a codebase, duplicated code, and a lack of tests. We've all done it. Copy-pasting a block of code feels like a massive time saver in the moment. But let me tell you, it's a lazy trap. Because when requirements inevitably change, that undocumented copy-pasted logic makes manual testing a total nightmare. You have to hunt down every single instance like a detective. Stop the copy-pasting, centralize your logic, and please, always write tests so you have a solid safety net for those weird edge cases. Finally, we have to talk about the dreaded God component. This is that absolute monster of a file handling, form validation, submission, error handling, global state management, and rendering the UI, literally doing everything under the sun. This completely shatters the single responsibility principle. God components ruin code quality because they are basically impossible to debug or extend without breaking something else. You absolutely must split these giants up into smaller, modular hooks and highly focused functional components.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Mastering Clean React Code. Returning with the elixir.
So how do we actually fix all this? Well, when you consciously replace these bad habits with structured, well-thought-out logic, React goes from being frustrating to incredibly powerful, modular, and scalable. But true mastery doesn't happen overnight, right? It requires guided practice. As one learner, Matt Netko, brilliantly stated, "Short, hands-on keyboard lessons are exactly what I needed to make React click for me." For the focused learner, just passively watching an explainer isn't enough. Getting your hands dirty, building things, and practicing these foundations interactively is the real key to mastery. And as another learner, Sandy, pointed out, reviewing these concepts is an awesome backtracker as a way to learn about the why of our code. Understanding the why behind your code architecture, why we absolutely need keys, why we run from God components, why we extract heavy logic, is exactly what prevents you from writing tangled spaghetti code down the line. Once you internalize the why, the how basically becomes second nature. So that brings me to my final challenge for you today. Take a real hard look at the code you wrote this week. I mean it. Which of these 6 anti-patterns is currently lurking in your code base? Are you guilty of props drilling? Have you accidentally birthed a God component? I highly encourage you to immediately open up your own projects, do a thorough interior inspection, and keep learning, building, and refining your React mastery. Until next time.